Hi everybody, my name is Neil O'Neill, for those of you that I haven't been working on projects with up to now. I'm going to briefly talk you through content migration. It's something that I spoke about last year and the year before, something that comes up more and more again. So be it manual migration or auto migration. I'm going to touch very high level, just on a few of the points to go through, and then I'm going to do a case study based on a very specific custom migration tool that we built for Whites and Lux, a law firm in New York. So, and eventually what they're going to do is bring over close to nearly 2 million pages, small by small piece over the next year and a half to 2 years. So Terminalfour comes at the moment with a number of migration tools. Currently, I suppose the main HTML importer we're looking at the moment, and that's something we're going to talk about later on for version 8, where we're going to improve. So typically, I suppose we originally it was the big bang approach. We had to basically grab everything at once and bring it into Site Manager, and that poses its own problems in that, you know, if something goes wrong, you go back to the start and you basically do everything again. So what we've been looking at is how we can break it down. So you can do either target departments, you can target schools, you can target smaller areas and bring them in. And the main things that we're looking at the moment to allow us to do that is a link resolver and a media resolver. So at the moment we can bring everything in. The reason we have to do it in Big Bang is so that we can resolve all of your links and resolve all of your media in one go. But that's coming down the road. So even with auto migration, just to point out that there will be some manual migration, if not a little bit more manual migration, especially around the QA that you're going to need. With the HTML importer, what we generally try to say is that we bring in about 80% of the content. So you have to allow and you have to plan for that. So what's going to happen to the other 20? Do you just kind of say, oh, that's great, we've got 80% of it and move on? So it's just something to have a think about. And in some cases, and what's turning out, not some cases, but nearly always the case at the moment, there's custom tools. So we'll use the HTML importer with one or two of the other tools that are available within the product at the moment. So again, these are just points really for you to take away afterwards, and that you can have a think about if this is something that you're approaching. So yesterday we were actually talking about this. So manual, what's kind of the maximum, or where does it become efficient to start looking at using the HTML importer? Generally we would have said around the 800-900 page mark, but really things are becoming a lot faster, and we have a process for manual migration that's become a lot more, I suppose, slick over the last year. So about 1,500 pages, we will tend to just straight away just go manually at it, and we'll set up a process to do that with you. For manual, you have a lot more control, you have a lot more QA, you're going to get a lot more of your pages, so you're QAing as you're going along. When it's auto, so basically anything over the 1,500 to 1,600 mark, you're going to look at auto migration, and that's where we can use a combination of the HTML importer and some of the tools that are there. Important thing about auto is how good is your code. So there's no point saying to us, bring everything in, and then we have a look at your code and say, your code is absolutely dreadful. You know, we're going to need to put in certain tags, we're going to need whatever, and then you say, oh, well, we can't do that, but still bring everything in. And this is where we're constantly looking to see how we can work with you. The other one that was Mark mentioned earlier on, we tend to have the slide in integration. So you're not only looking at manually getting everything into Site Manager, there is the option to use either the web object or the data object, so you can add information outside of Site Manager. Up until recently, we had people using one or the other, or a small amount, but HCC, which I think only launched on Tuesday, are an example where they've used a combination of importing the content using Content Syncer from 2 or 3 different external applications. They're also using the web objects and the data objects, and as mentioned then, I don't think they even realize themselves they have 240,000 different combination of courses, and that's all coming through Content Syncer and the 2 different data objects that are there, and everything gets fed and output through Site Manager. So there's a lot of things to think about if you're going to approach manual migration. Pie chart. There's no presentation without having a pie chart. What I'm going to talk about really is just a very, very high level on your content migration. So step 1, a copy of the website. How do we actually get at the source that you want us to bring over? So you have a couple of options around. We can scrape your site, you can scrape your site, give it to us. So basically we take your HTML, and then we're able to import that, we're able to map it as best we can, and we're able to import that into Site Manager. As well, looking at if you can give us an XML output, we'll be able to work with that, we'll be able to bring it in. Or what tends to work an awful lot better is, and it's an awful lot cleaner, is direct database to database. So directly from your current database in the application that you have, directly into Site Manager database. The reason why we haven't, I suppose, up until now gone down the database to database route is you have the issue with links, and then you have the issue with media. So how do you resolve them, get the T4 tags? What is being developed at the moment is a link resolver, which also then means that if we get the link resolver fully finished, which is due sometime this year, that will also mean it'll be the same logic for a media resolver. And they'll be independent tools that you'll be able to just go into within Site Manager and say, I want to run a link resolver against this section, and it will go off and have a look at Site Manager and see what it can resolve. The same with the media. We'll have a look in the media library and say, okay, I can see that media is there, let's wrap it in a T4 tag, and then it's all controlled within Site Manager. Step 2, analysis of the website. You have two options really when you're bringing it in. So how do you build your breadcrumbs? How do you build your IA? How do you build basically Site Manager? What are you going to use to tell Site Manager where you want a certain piece of content or sections? Two ways really are using the breadcrumbs. If we scrape your site, we'll be able to match your breadcrumbs. That's if your breadcrumbs are consistent across all of your site, and it's a big problem. Generally clients will say just, yeah, it's all grand, and we go off and we'll do it, and we find that we're missing lots of parts of the sites, and then we're going back and we're trying to do it and basically put in breadcrumbs. So you can do it on your breadcrumbs, or else what we can do is we can do it on your file structure, and we'll be able to build it out. So based on the file structure. It's one to definitely have to think about, especially if you're restructuring your structure going in for the new site, how you're going to map the old structure into the new structure. Other steps, is it multilingual? How are you going to manage that? Are you going to use the multilingual capacity within Site Manager? So just something to have a think about. And then the structure of the content as well. Configuring the tool, I suppose it's a combination of, it definitely needs a techie or a development person to use the tool. At the moment we're trying to take a step back and make it much more user-friendly, and in version 8, which we'll be touching on over tomorrow, we've definitely taken a step back and tried to put a much cleaner interface on it to make it as user-friendly as possible. Running the migration, so we're after getting all of the information, we're after finding out where we're going to get it, you're after figuring out how to build your structure, we're after figuring out then how we're going to do the mapping during the migration. So running the migration is really us going off and getting the content and bringing it in via bundles into Site Manager. This is where we used to be good up until, and running the migration, I would say it's all there and off you go and kind of look at your content. Where we've taken, again, another step back looking at the processes, we now put nearly more time into the QA and the testing at the end of it, as opposed to, I suppose, front loading all of our resources into the techie bit. And really that's where we would spend an awful lot more of our time now. And definitely we would push clients to give an awful lot more time for it, because then ultimately your go lives get pushed out if you don't give enough time. Okay. And then the manual updates. Very one-liners, something for you to really take away and have a think about if you're going to approach the content or auto content migration at the moment. And some questions, I'm not going to go through them all, just that you should flag or basically start talking with your internal teams about if you're approaching it. Okay. And just some systems that we've migrated from currently, so just a list of some of the most recent ones and some of the bigger ones that we have done. Okay, so the main point of the presentation was to touch on content migration, but also to tell you a little bit, just looking at the tweets from a few people saying that they weren't aware of the content syncer. So again, it's just to showcase what is there and what's in the product at the moment. So Whites & Luxembourg, a client, a law firm in New York, came to us with a challenge that they wanted to work with us to solve. So they have large amounts of information, up to close to nearly 2 million pages that they want to bring into Site Manager bit by bit. They didn't want the big bang approach. So what they said to us was they want to target their current database by page ID. So they will list all of their pages as, say, 1_PerryWhites.html, and it's the page ID is their primary source for their pages. So they wanted to be able to say, here's 10,000 IDs, and go off and bring that information into Site Manager. Okay, so that was the start of the problem. They also then wanted us to automatically build the hierarchy as we were doing that, and we were bringing in the content. They then wanted us to be able to clean their code. So I've spent the last year, 2 years redesigning a corporate site, and what they're saying was that their current code has all of the inline CSS and has a lot of kind of tags and different code that they no longer want, and they want the CSS and some of the global resources to be controlled within Site Manager in one file place. So they needed a way to remove all of that. So they wanted us to give them the facility, once they've imported the content, to clean their HTML. Then they wanted a link resolver to check basically as sites were coming in, and any of the HTML they wanted to be able to, the links to resolve to T4 tags and to link within Site Manager. And lastly, they wanted an automatic URL redirect. So it was a nice opening conversation at the start, and of course we said yes, and Piero's best everything is possible phrase, and then we went off and said, how are we going to do this? So everything is possible, and everything that's up there at the moment is in the product. It's in 7.4.3, so there's slight little bits of configuration that you'll need to do, but I'm able to do it, so you'll be able to do it. So Piero got his formatting back in with the red on the slide. So to give you an idea, just a high-level idea of what's happening. So Whites and Lux had a specific case in that we debated, should it be at database level or should it be in Excel? The reason they were thinking Excel was, say for their corporate site, there might be 1,000 pages, whatever it is. They didn't want to have to tie up, say, a database admin or a developer. They wanted to be able to have the facility, somebody who could use Excel, could basically set up the structure of the website. And then an admin and Site Manager would be able to bring in that content. So they asked that we develop a plugin that will work with Excel. It also works with any data source. At the moment, well, not any, I won't throw that out there. At the moment, we've tested with SQL and MySQL, and it works absolutely fine. So you're able to connect to a data source. We then pull in the information. We create the hierarchy automatically as we're bringing in the content using the content syncer. What we then do is we give the option where you're able to call up an interface and you're able to upload a properties file, and you can specify the tags that you want to keep, and it removes everything else. So it's basically, if you want to only keep, say, H1 tags, you put in H1, and every other tag is going to be removed from your code so that it's no longer using inline CSS, it's using your global. And then once the HTML cleaner is finished, then the link resolver can be run. And what the link resolver will do is, as you're bringing in the content, it will have a look at all of the links that it can resolve. It resolves them. Anything that it doesn't resolve in that import, it will store them in a database. And then the next time you do an import, it will say, okay, I'm after doing everything again, and it will go and check the database and say, is there any links in here I can now resolve now that something else has been brought in? So that over time, as the sites are brought in, you'll be able to eventually resolve all of your links. What they also wanted us to do then was to capture, there's a number of fields which we'll go through, and they wanted us to capture some of their metadata that they already had, and we're capturing it in the I suppose the general section details that you can add in. So what I have is, I'll bring you in and actually show you it working. The slides have a screen grab of everything and just a brief explanation, so that when they're available you can download them and you can walk through. Hopefully Excel. Okay, so to give you an idea, at the moment they have a page ID which is unique enough to Whites and Lux. The level, so basically what you want, so 0 is home, and then 1, 1.1, 1.11, 1.111, you get the idea. You can build up your hierarchy of what you want. Again, the reason that was done in Excel was that they could have somebody in the office who wasn't techie basically going through this and saying, okay, this is exactly what I want. The section name is going to be your section name. The content HTML, in their previous CMS, they had one field with all of the HTML in it. So I suppose the evolution of this, where it would probably go, is that we'd be able to add in multiple fields so that you're able to put in a name, a title, your paragraph, and then you'd be able to map it one for one when you bring it into your content types. At the moment, what Whites and Luxembourg have is that it's basically one blob of HTML, and we bring that in, and then eventually we're going to start cleaning it up as they start using the Site Manager. The original URL, so the original URL then allows us, we take that, and then that's what we use to then create the automatic static rewrite. The template ID for what template it's going to use, or content type, and the meta descriptions title is the name of the title of the content, and we don't actually use the menu name or the old URL. All of this, there's nothing that they have to do except for the levels. Everything just comes as a database dump. So they basically do a query on their current database and say, here's a list of all the pages we want, and they get this information out. So there's no manual writing all of this up. And the only manual bit then is levels. So if you wanted to walk away here now and import, say, from something that you have locally, the only requirement is that the fields are exactly the same names, naming convention as you have within here. Okay, so to show you setting it up, Laura touched on it earlier on. So it's a plugin for the content syncer. So in here, basically what you're doing is you're saying the plugin that you want to use, which is developed and everybody can use. I've just called it Whites and Lux plugin for the example. And then the database or your data source that you want to use. So your driver is your standard drivers that you can get, so be it wherever your data source you're going to connect to. In this instance, it's Excel, so I'm going through an ODBC connection. And then the URL is just your connection string. So what you're specifying is, and this I suppose can go off to a remote server. It doesn't have to be a remote machine, it doesn't have to be local. So at the moment I don't have in the address of a remote machine, but you can put in an IP address, and once you have access to that, you'll be able to go off and pull the information. And sync1 is just the name of the file I gave it. There's information up on the extranet about this, and it specifies, you know, exactly the parameters that you need to put in. Just to give you an example, I know from talking earlier on just about the content syncer for Eastern Virginia Medical School, a project that we were doing over the last year. I was chatting one day to Natalie, and I said, what are you doing for the weekend? She said, going off to basically input 1,000 new students manually into Site Manager and their information. And I said, oh, would it not use the content syncer? And again, like a few people here, she wasn't aware of it. So what she did was she remoted, basically she made a connection into the registration system, got the details, the table, and she went directly to the table with all the students that registration had already done the work putting in, and she just synced that information, so basically 10 or 15 minutes, and she had all of her student information into the system. So once you have your data source set up, if you go into your external content syncer, good Blue Peter style, here's one that I made earlier, and that hopefully still works. So Laura ran through earlier on a few of the options that you have, so I'm not going to go through them again. The main thing I'm specifying here is, excuse me, where I want to bring the data or the content into. So I'm just going to bring everything into t44u. I'm going to use the site structure creators Whites and Lux plugin and the channel. Okay. And for first-time users, when you're setting up content syncer, the main test basically to do, so you set up your database connection, you'll do it, which we just showed. The main test is to just query your database. If it refreshes and brings you back to the same page, like it did there, it means that you have a connection, and if it doesn't, it will come up with a warning, giving you some information on what's the problem is. Just that you, not that you don't trust me, but at the moment you'll see t44u and there's no information there. So I'm going to run a sync. And now that it's worked, now it can be a bit cocky. I did this over in America, I was a bit cocky before, and we ran into a problem, yeah. So just a small private joke, I suppose, for Doug and Nicholas, myself and David were running this yesterday, and we just thought, see, that's how easy it was for the OECD to import all of their content. Okay, it's the normal, you'll get your error messages if there's errors or you can't get the information. And then you'll you'll see the different sections, the parent-child relationship. And that's everything that you specified in the database. It's okay. So if we publish that out, okay, so the publish out just allows me, it's basically what you're going to do is on the publish, and for the URL redirect to work in a few minutes, which I'll show you, we've brought the minimum time that you can output is the interval to automatically output is a minute. So what we have is we basically have an XML file that's outputting, constantly looking at what's being imported and outputting XML, and then we read that and basically create the rules within a rewrite mapping. So basically every minute that's getting updated and then sent out to your web server. Okay, so just default to the old site, that's getting revamped. And if we go to okay, so we go, you can see t44u and John, so this is just parts of the content that we got in. Okay, so that's in the new structure, and we're saying we're happy with that, if we're happy with it, and that's the new URL. But within the information that we brought in, we've captured the old URL. So we have the old URL. What we can do is, if we put it in, you can see that it automatically redirects. So we had the old URL automatically redirecting, and it's an automated process which you can get at your original URL. It's a static rewrite that we're doing for Whites and Looks, but we also have regex. So if you want, we can take it off. The page ID is what we're using regex for within IAS, and then within Apache is just your HD access. A lot easier to do rather than using IAS. So either way you can do it, and that's available now. So far that's bringing in the content, building the hierarchy, and the URL redirect working. So the other one that's available is the HTML clean. Okay, so there's going to be, again with version 8, there's going to be a new interface to this. So basically what you're saying is you're telling Site Manager what you want to clean. Okay, so I'll just clean everything under t44u. And what you're going to do is upload a properties file of what you actually want to do. So I have a few notes on this. There's 3 or 4 different options within the slides that you can download. I'll show you now shortly. So this is an example just I've used in a demo a few days ago with Whites and Looks. So their stipulation was that they wanted to keep the P, H1, H2, H3 image and title, and everything else they wanted stripped out. They didn't want to know about it. So we're basically just saying the tag valued attribute and the elements that we want to keep. So if you're using it, you have to keep in mind it's what you want to keep, and everything else is removed. Okay? And there is an explanation, and there's different examples that we can provide for how you'd use it if you wanted to basically use the tags or the attributes and combine them. Okay, so I have a simple properties file on the desktop. What I'm going to do is use that. I click submit. And it's gone through, and you can see basically what it's after cleaning. So it's after cleaning the HTML. There's basic, using the different Java classes that are there, there's a basic HTML clean. So basically, not the clean as in what you want to remove. It will look at the HTML code and will do a basic, basically check on it to make sure that if you removed one tag, is the opposing close tag gone, or vice versa. So it will do a little bit of a sanity check on it, as best as we can do at the moment. So it should help that your HTML at least should be valid after you've run the clean. Okay, so the example, I'll just briefly run through it. The example I'm after giving is the data source. What it was actually nice to see was they were using Excel, and this was the stipulation from Whites and Lux, and then literally last week, or a week and a half ago, turned around and said, we just spotted a problem. The maximum characters that you can have within any one cell within Excel is 32,000 characters, and they had some code that was over that, and the maximum rows that you can have in Excel is 67,000 rows. So again, if they wanted to import 100,000 or pages, whatever, they were restricted. So what they actually then turned around very quickly was and just said, oh, we're just going to use SQL in their case, and it was literally kind of 5-10 minute switch. So there was no big hullabaloo or no pain involved. So if you're setting it up at the moment and you want to use it when you go back to the office, you can set it up, just make sure that the fields are following the exact convention that's here. Make sure your data source is set up and that you can see it. Ensure that your plugin is being used to build a hierarchy. Just showing you an example of what's being built, exactly what we just did there now. And then the only thing that you'll need to know that isn't there at the moment is, I suppose, just the link to the HTML clean. And all it is in your URL at the moment, where instead of hierarchy equals whatever, you can just put in HTML clean. But that's something we can send you on. If you want to give an email, I can send you on a more detail about it. Okay, so what is available? Remove tags only, remove attributes only, or remove tags and content. And then an example of the properties file. For those of you who love static rewrites, just a picture of static rewrites. So it's just straightforward. There isn't anything amazing about it, but yeah. Okay, and just to give you a very brief look, you've seen it on the screens around. This is the start of, I suppose, the version 8 and the interface that we're going to put on it for the URL redirect, so that it becomes a little bit more intuitive. Any questions on that?